That's what.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to the next episode of How to Get Away with Staffing. My name is Colin LeBeau, president here at Fox Hire. We're an employer of record platform in the United States. And I've got two of my friends, Nate Capel and John Lindesmith, here with me to talk about the gig economy. What's up, guys?
Hello.
Hey,
How are you?
nice to
Hi.
be here.
Excellent to be here.
Guys, good?
Doing well.
Sweet. We were just talking about, before we started recording, in the green room, not really, but about how the gig economy is sort of causing a lot of people to be lone wolf workers. So what did you mean by that, Nate, when you brought that up?
Yeah, so right before we started recording, I was talking about there's a global trends report that's given to the president every time a new president comes into office or every time they get started in another 4-year cycle. And it's from, one of the national intelligence councils or something. And they were saying that this is one of the ones from I couldn't remember, maybe 2012 or 2008 or something. It was an earlier one, but they were saying that over the next decades that there's going to be a move from pension plans and corporate workers into gig economy workers, into lone wolf workers, and it's going to just impact the way that businesses ran. And it's interesting to kind of see that happen now that we're nearing 2025. We're seeing more and more independent workers, Airbnb, DoorDash, some of the for hire people, contracted people. So just kind of an interesting trend.
I love that. Yeah, and I think what's interesting is a lot of people think about this concept a little bit differently. Like, oh, we're going into the future. That's the future of work, and it is. But I think it was also the past of work, right? Like, being employed by a company is really only like 150 years old. And that wasn't necessarily like how people made their livings back before that time, corporate jobs and things like that, factories, et cetera. There was a local economy in every town, right? And you were a lone wolf worker. Most people ran their own business, whether that be a farm or, there was the local blacksmith or the local cobbler or the local person that handled X, Y, and Z in your community. That was their lone wolf sort of business. That was their trade. That was what they did. And so it's almost going back to that more natural form of labor or work where people can work for themselves, but instead of in a local or regional economy, they actually have access to the global economy. And instead of needing organizations and large corporations to deliver labor to them, they can go find labor for themselves via these channels.
It's like I don't know if you have it on your desk still, Colin. It's the Jeff Wald book, The End of Jobs. That's basically what we're talking about here. Which
shout out Jeff Wald.
Shout out Jeff Wald. For those that haven't read it, that's like the history book about jobs, which is really cool.
Yes.
And it goes into explaining exactly what you said about where we're going in like the future of work, which is very pertinent to what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the gig economy or gig platforms like Uber, Lyft, et cetera, are just sort of like the start of that. And I even think that before that, there was pieces of this that came to fruition with like the creator economy with like YouTubers and Instagram people that would make brand deals and things like that. That was like their own little be my own business type endeavor through these types of technology platforms. And I think that just grew to these other types of opportunities that we're seeing right now. But interestingly, it's affecting, it is a way that people get jobs. It is a way that people find labor and pay. And it's disrupting or changing, impacting a more traditional method that people were able to find jobs like this, specifically gig jobs, which you would classify as like temporary or short-term assignments. And that's the staffing market, right? And I think the staffing market has been impacted pretty significantly by the gig economy. And I only think that that's going to grow. And I think there's positive and negative ones, but would love to, I'm excited to explore that a little bit and sort of see where it takes us. But wanted to see, have you guys, let's just start with this, because I think it's this pervasive, right? Like, have you guys caught a ride on Uber or Lyft?
Yeah.
What about
Of course.
DoorDash?
Like every night.
What about maybe have you hired somebody from Upwork or Fiverr to do a job for your department?
Yeah. Free Up is one of those where you can hire people to do, whatever secretary admin work, freelance design work,
Yep.
stuff like that. It's pretty
Make me a
helpful.
logo, make me a website, right? Like there's things like that that are happening all the time. And I think, if we were to ask the audience that's listening to this, whether now or in the future, right? If they also have used any of these platforms, most people would say yes. Right. So if you're a staffing firm, how are you thinking about this? Right. Like, John, let me ask you, like, if you were a staffing firm owner, how are you thinking about these gig platforms? Are they competitive to you? Are they something totally different? You don't even care about them? Like, what are you thinking about them?
They have positives and negatives. I would imagine, like anything.
Sure.
It's definitely a new way of thinking, but it's kind of pushed the staffing industry that was, into this, like, not that they're ever comfortable, but into this like uncomfortable role of like trying to figure out what's next. Where do we fit in with this? Like, what do we need to compete or partner with these types of ways that people are working? So it's definitely like boosted and given like a little bit of like a push to those companies to like say like, hey, we need technology that does this now. We need the ability to pivot on these jobs quickly. Like, we need to be able to pay people more quickly. All those things I think are positives, um, ultimately, because it's obviously the biggest positive of everything is that it's allowing people to find work more quickly so they can do jobs like that. So that's always a good thing.
Right.
And then the staffing companies that been around for forever are just pivoting and making sure that they can compete in that environment where things are changing constantly.
Yeah. And I think that some staffing markets are just not being affected right now, at least not at scale, where others are really, really impacted, right? So I think, as an example, healthcare represents like 60 to 70% of the overall gig platform revenue as it relates to the staffing markets, right? Like, I'm carving out Uber and Lyft there because they're not necessarily staffing. But healthcare gig platform apps really, really have disrupted the market there, to the point where a lot of the healthcare staffing firms, whether they're big like Aya Healthcare or AMN or these other players like that, who already have some technology capabilities, they're retrofitting something to make shift-based staffing models, per diem staffing models, work for them. So I
Are
think
you
that's,
talking about like PRNs? Is that kind
yeah,
of what you're
yeah,
talking
exactly.
about?
Like, take a shift on your phone, right? Like, that's what we're talking about. Take a shift on your phone. The IntelliCares of the world, CareRev, Snap Nurse, I think SnapCare, I think they changed their name, SnapCare. Any of those, right? Those have challenged the traditional travel nurse local per diem staffing firm model. And I think some of the bigger players are retrofitting that same type of technology to their traditional staffing firms, right? So like Aya Healthcare, as an example, does that. And so I think that's a positive impact. I know the smaller staffing firms are struggling with that, but I think it's interesting to see how the staffing market can bring their technology game up and compete with these gig platforms traditionally. I think that's a good impact, in my opinion.
The other thing I didn't mention and I just kind of thought of is that a lot of staffing companies, including ourselves, are using services like this to help push themselves
Yeah.
forward and what they need to do. So it's been a benefit for companies that can utilize these types of gig platforms to push themselves further as well. So it's not that they're competing with them all the time. They're sometimes partnering and using them, which is obviously a positive.
Yeah. Totally agree. And I think the staffing market is probably one of the biggest users of virtual assistants, which is truly a gig type of service as well. Whether that's to like book meetings or find candidates, source leads, any of those types of things. Like, virtual assistants are very heavily leveraged in the staffing market. So totally benefits as buyers as well. And I think there are some really strong, benefits for the staffing market in that regard. But let's talk about some of the challenges it's creating. Any challenges come to mind for you that have been created by the gig platforms as it relates to just the traditional staffing firm?
Well, I'm trying to think. I'm not a staffing person. I'm not a recruiter, right? But I'm trying to think about how can, like, if they're not in that game, how can somebody get into the gig game as a recruiter? You know, not, I mean, not themselves, but hiring and making it a part of their business.
Yeah. Well, I
Right?
think, we're seeing that happen with technology. So staffing platforms as a service, right? That's sort of, or maybe it's freelance management as a service. Either way, there are technologies that are basically white labeled that you can apply to your current staffing firm. So what the staffing firms do have is a candidate database. They have access to large groups of candidates. All they need to do is connect those candidates to jobs, right? And right now they're doing it manually, phone calls, emails, etc. But if they can create a technology that they can then give their clients access to where those jobs can connect to candidates by themselves, they're in the game. And there are technologies like Wolf, as an example. They won the SIA startup pitch competition last year, I believe. And that's a white labeled platform as a service that enables staffing firms to offer a very similar experience to their clients. But it's their private candidate database that they're giving them access to via that technology. So that's what I'm saying. I think there are technologies coming to fruition, whether they're homegrown by the big staffing firms or the staffing platforms as a service, that can enable these traditional staffing firms to compete in the same way.
If they choose to, they're not forced to.
They don't have to either, but they could.
So,
To Nate's
yes,
point.
absolutely. Because you're right. I mean, they have that huge data. Most staffing companies have this huge database of candidates. So why not utilize that however you can to make money and further the growth of your firm?
Yeah, and most, especially in the healthcare field, most candidates are on multiple apps, right? So like most databases are very heavily overlapping, right? It's really just about like what experience can you deliver in addition to that technology experience, right? And I think that's where the recruiters can excel, because they're calling and developing relationships and understanding a candidate's needs, not just showing them a bunch of shifts in their area, which I think is interesting value proposition and value add for those types of traditional firms, where I think that's where they can win.
Yep, definitely. Obviously, the other negative that's kind of like always in the news these days are all of the different regulations that are getting created because of this. So it's, the rise of gig work also creates more visibility and scrutiny towards those types of workers and companies. Um, Colin, I know you follow the legal aspect of this quite a bit, so I'll let you kind of dig into it a little bit. But it started, maybe not started, but in my mind, it started with AB5 in California, and that has been going through legal battles for a number of years now that we might be getting close to being done with at this point. But there's legal battles
Never
popping
over.
everywhere. So I think you mentioned there's one in, was it Denver, Colorado?
Yeah, I mean,
As
there's a
well?
lot of different lawsuits happening at the state level, because all the states have to be different, obviously, and some are more
Of
lenient than others.
course.
But yeah, so but you're right. AB5, Assembly Bill 5, California, was the first one that took aim at Uber and Lyft to try and force them to classify their workers as W-2s versus 1099s, because that legislation argued that the workers for Lyft and Uber and the different apps were not being afforded the benefits of W-2 employment and were essentially being robbed of wages and benefits, etc. Now, Uber and Lyft really took issue with that, obviously, because that challenged their entire business model, because they want to leverage the 1099 independent contractor model, and they fought it for years and years and years and years. And so they've essentially fought it to the point where I don't believe that AB5 is going to impact them specifically. However, I do think it has impacted staffing, and it has impacted other industries. I do think it applies to healthcare staffing gig apps, though, not necessarily the driving apps. But that kicked it all off. And then to your point, different cities or counties or states even have taken their own stances on that, more lenient, more aggressive. And Denver was just an example. Just I don't know if charged is the right word, but they delivered like 20,000 violations to InstaWork. And I guess InstaWork challenged that.
If I can just pause really quick, I'll let you guys pick this conversation back up. AB5, for the listeners out there who don't know what AB5 is, AB5 is the classification of 1099 workers and what it means for a company. Should they be W-2? Should it be 1099? So example would be like Lyft drivers they operate on their own schedule, but they only get paid a certain amount, so are they at 1099? Do they work for the company? Do they work for themselves? It's this whole like gray area of what are they? So that's what AB5 is for those of you listening who don't know already.
Exactly. Yeah. And that law sort of gave a 3-point test, ABC test, that helped or supposed to advise companies on how to go through answering that question, right? Are they controlled by the company, or do they have their own schedule? Are they an independently established trade? Things like this. And when you take the test, most people do not pass the test. Just being frank, most people don't. But Uber and Lyft fought that battle with lobbyists and whatnot.
When you say pass test, does that mean that that they pass that they are a 1099, or pass that they aren't a 1099?
When I say pass the test, I mean they don't qualify as an independent contractor, right? You're taking the test to determine if they qualify as an independent contractor, not vice versa. People don't typically take the test to see if they're supposed to be a W-2. If you go with the W-2, you're pretty much always covered. That's sort of like the preferred method according to the government. You're taking the ABC test or trying to qualify against AB5 to determine if you can be an independent contractor legally and like have a check mark from the government, like, yeah, you're right. But it's all to your own discretion. You have to consult your own legal counsel, make your own decision. They're giving you guidance. And then if they take issue with you, like Uber and Lyft, they'll bring cases against you and try to make you change your business model.
There are lots of money against you too.
Exactly. And so Uber and Lyft, who have lots of money from funding rounds and investors and whatnot, can fight that battle because that's core to their business model. So it's worth it for them to fight that battle. Yeah. So that has been a challenge. The 1099 versus W-2 question has been a really big challenge because for traditional staffing firms, they are being competed against in their eyes. I'm just speaking on behalf of a lot of staffing firms, at a disadvantage. Because if you're operating as a 1099 model, as a gig app, and you don't have the employment related costs associated with employing the workers as W-2s, like taxes, healthcare benefits, workers' comp insurance, etc., you can price your services lower to clients comparative to a traditional staffing agency. And that has created a lot of challenges for traditional staffing firms on how they can compete with these gig platforms, in that those platforms are delivering much cheaper services for the same service, essentially. So that has been a big challenge for staffing agencies. There has been a lot of fight. Denver, as an example, in that lawsuit, specifically said that the staffing industry has been around for a long time. I'm quoting here from the article. The staffing industry has been around for a long time, and its members shouldn't have to compete against rivals who profit from wage theft. Those are not my words. That's the city of Denver. That's pretty strong language, though, right? Like, that's a pretty strong statement. So cities like Seattle, Portland, Denver, those West Coast cities have taken this stance. And I do know of different lawsuits in just those jurisdictions, not the whole state, that have taken similar positions on 1099 gig platforms. So that has definitely been a big challenge, but it does work in some types of jobs, right? Like jobs where people are doing projects that doesn't require daily control, right? That doesn't require a manager to meet with that person on a daily or weekly basis. That doesn't require somebody to work on a specific schedule, right? Those are some of the requirements or testing components of AB5 type legislation. So if you think about it like, hey, can you make me this website, right? You ask somebody on Fiverr to do that. That's independent contract work, right? Like, you give them your requests, they create the website on their own time, at their own speed, using their own decision-making, and they come back to you with a product, you pay them, and you give them a 1099. Like, that's sort of the right way, right? That type of project-based work, create me a flyer, or write me an article, or, things of that nature, right? And where I think a lot of this legislation is going, and where it doesn't work, is like, for healthcare, as an example, putting 1099 workers alongside W-2 workers in the same type of job, where they do have a schedule, they have to show up to a specific place, they have a manager, they have policies and procedures to follow, right? Like, that doesn't work according to this legislation. And that's where I think a lot of the challenges are coming from.
That's kind of how I understand it not to work before this legislation, honestly,
Yeah.
too. It's like it doesn't make sense. Like you can't have a W-2 and a 1099 doing the same type of job at the same company. Like it just like doesn't make any sense. Like there's got to be something going on there. And I think companies are seeing that, especially with the legislation actually coming out and making that gray area less gray. Is that we're seeing people converting that were strictly 1099 business converting that all over to W-2s because
Mhm.
they're like, oh, this is more black and white. I have clients that want to convert these people over because they don't want to mess with all these potential issues, and they're pushing their workers over to W-2 employment. So I think that's
Yes.
becoming more and more frequent that we're seeing.
The biggest thing you said was clients. Clients are doing it, right? If the clients aren't willing to sign up for the 1099 model because they are at risk, which they are, clients can be fined alongside the platforms or the staffing firms they work with if they are found to have participated in hiring 1099 workers that are misclassified, regardless of who sends them the money, regardless of which organization sends the money to the worker or pays the worker or employs the work, whatever you want to call it, right? Agent of record, doesn't matter. The Department of Labor has specifically done that in multiple instances where clients and staffing firms have been fined together. So that's where the clients are saying, hey, gig platform company, we're not willing to take on this risk. You have to deliver these candidates in a W-2 model or we're not going to work with you.
I didn't know that. That's really interesting.
That's what's going to cause the change. It's not going to be the regulation because basically, to your point, John, this regulation, these laws have basically been in place for a long time. Right? And before, there was no reason to really challenge. It's like, okay, yeah, we all agree it's fine. Some people did nefarious things and did get caught and stuff, but for the most part, but these new gig platforms are saying, well, we don't like that. We don't like this law. So this is why we think we're different. And their position is, well, we're not necessarily employing these people. We're just connecting. Our platform is just a marketplace. It connects people with jobs. However they want to be classified and be paid, who's to say who decide, right? Like they're taking that position. Like we're not the employer. We're just a marketplace. And so they're basically saying, we don't like this legislation. We don't want it to apply to us. And we're going to fight you in the courts.
And the spirit of that makes all kinds of sense because that's what they were trying to do. They're not trying to like game anything, but the government's like, whoa, this is a lot of workers and a lot of money that we're not getting any money from because they're not getting taxed as 1099 workers, and they're trying to implement stricter rules, and that's where we're kind of like fighting back and forth on trying to find that sweet spot of, I mean, no one's ever going to all be happy, but they're trying to get there.
Where do you think it's going to land, John?
It's a good question. Money typically wins, so I'm guessing I would be on the side of money, which Uber and Lyft have a lot of it. So they kind of won the first round, but I think that it's going to be a longer term battle. And I don't know if we'll ever get to a point where it's strictly black and white, but it's certainly getting closer. And I think that certainly will help people get on the right side of things.
So I just thought of this question. Do you think that there could potentially be a third category of worker as a solution?
Probably. What do you think would be the third? Do you have an idea of what that third
No,
category?
I don't
No?
think there's anything that would exist that would classify a third type of worker. It'd be something between a W-2 and a 1099. But I don't know if you'd call that a W-299 or something. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that would be.
Yeah, I think in Europe there's different what they call schemes. PAYE, and then there's like you can have umbrella company. You have these different schemes that they operate under, and there are three or four, I think it is, in their model. But I think for to your point, John, earlier, it's like it's where is the money going, right? And so I think for the Lyft and Uber of the world, where they're connecting workers with consumers, right? B2C, a driver with a rider, right? The rider doesn't care about the method that the app uses because the only risk they have is whether they get from point A to point B or they get their food or whatever the case may be. So they're willing to pay that money regardless. They do not care about any of this other stuff going on in the legal realm, right? All they care about is getting me a ride. And so they're going to pay that money to Uber because all they care about is that product. Conversely, on the B2C or B2B side, those clients do care about the method because they are exposed to risk. And I think that's where you're going to see the change. I don't think Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, any of those guys, any B2C type platform is really going to be driven to change unless the government specifically targets them and like goes after them with like, Congress and stuff like that. But I do think that the B2B based apps that do compete more specifically with staffing are going to be forced to change more often than not, because clients are going to move that direction. Clients are going to say, we just won't work with you unless you move to W-2 because we are exposed to risk. And that's where I think you're going to see the movement. So I think we're going to end with two different divergent categories, which is sort of where we're at today, right? Like you could go get a bunch of different services from independent contractors right now as a consumer, right? Like whether that's home services or, somebody to come paint my, wall in my house or something, right? Or like come work on this project for me or whatever outside of apps. So that's how it sort of is now, is you're just applying an app to that with taxis and other things. And then conversely, staffing firms service businesses. It's a B2B transaction. So I think that's what we're going to see happen with these apps.
The app kind of like makes it official, where it's like you can't just slide money on the table anymore.
Can't be under the table anymore, buddy.
It's documented.
Right.
So.
Yeah. But I think that's sort of where we're headed. And, I think, good things for this whole movement is like it is pushing traditional staffing firms to bring technology to the table. And it's challenging the status quo on how clients and candidates want to be engaged, which I think is good, right? I think it's bringing the industry to a more modern place. So I think all of that is actually helpful to the industry. But like you said, those challenges, they're creating a lot of legal standards, and it's leaving a lot of companies with some risk that they need to shore up before this movement can really mature. So in general, I think it's a good movement, but I think there is going to be some changes as we progress. So
it'll be fun to watch, that's for sure, because like the history of work is quite interesting. Like that's not a subject you're going to learn in school anytime soon, but it is very interesting to like see where we've gone as a society and where we're going to pivot next. Who knows? It'll be fun.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm excited to see what happens. So hopefully you guys are too. Really appreciate you guys listening to this. If you made it this far, we hope you found it valuable, and we'll see you next time on How to Get With Staffing. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.